Hi, I'm Alan Stoga, chairman of the Telberg Foundation and host of New Thinking for a New World. From time to time, we convene webinars on key global challenges. We recently held such a meeting to consider a specific aspect of mass migration. That is the impact on children and especially on their education. Listen as we discuss how to avoid losing a generation of children on the move. While you listen, please give some thought to nominating a leader for the Telberg SNF Eliasson Global Leadership Prize or for applying to participate in Telberg Leaders Mentoring Leaders. You can find information at telbergfoundation.org. Thank you. We all know that more and more people are moving, driven to migrate, either because they're pushed by fear or pulled in by opportunity. We also know that children make up a huge, perhaps the majority, and certainly the increasing share of the people who are on the move. We see those images every day, everywhere. Inevitably, that means that those kids are growing and developing in ways that challenge their future. Today's conversation will attempt to look for solutions. How can children on the move and under the crushing pressures that are associated with how refugees and migrants are treated today, how can they be educated? What works? What do we know doesn't work? In other words, today is a conversation about solutions, and hopefully the first of a series of conversations about solutions. To lead this conversation, today's conversation, we've invited three people who actually are in the solutions business when it comes to educating children outside the normal rhythm of school as we know it in the West. Pashtana Durrani is co-founder and managing director of Learn, which is providing quality education to girls in Afghanistan in spite of, and much to the frustration of, the Taliban. Lala Lovera is founder of Fundacion Comparte por una Vida in Colombia, working to educate Venezuelan children who have been forced to flee their country. And Caroline Kronley is president of the Tinker Foundation, which, among other things, stood up an amazing education initiative during the pandemic that continues to support a wide range of innovative programs in the education space, particularly for young children around the Americas.
Well, thank you so much, Alan and Pashtana. Lala, it is such a pleasure to be here with you today. I know in one panel, we're not necessarily going to be able to capture the breadth and diversity of this issue, but I think your own personal experiences and professional work is such an important starting point, and especially as we really focus, as Alan said, on solutions. So Pashtana, let me start with you. You undertook much of your own education as a refugee. You're now working from outside your country as you lead Learn Afghanistan. Tell us a little bit about how your work with your organization intersects with the issues of migration and education, and some of what you're seeing work amidst all of the challenges that we can imagine you face.
Thank you so much, first of all, for doing this. And thank you, Alan, for making this happen. It was a much needed discussion, I think, right now, given the circumstances. Also, when I talk about my work, I think now that as you were asking this question, I was like, I have never worked under normal circumstances, or studied under normal circumstances. It has always been a special case, and I was like, that is true. But then at the same time, I'm working on this course at Wellesley, and it's about sustaining humanitarian and education efforts in uncertainty. The one thing I have seen is when I ended up in the US is people sort of know there is a system and there is something wrong with the system, and we need to make it right. So people work more on making it right, what to replace, what to innovate, what to bring in. But then I come from a space where we don't have a system. There is no system in place. Everybody is doing something, but collectively it doesn't make a system. So growing up, I think the first example was we had a school in our own home that was educating girls from a curriculum that was made in the 80s by UNICEF. And then I would go to a school that was English medium, and they would teach us in Pakistani curriculum that was not necessarily catering to my heritage, my culture, or my background, where I was coming from. So those are the sort of two boats that I used to struggle with. In the morning, I used to do one thing, and then in the evening, I used to go to that school. And now I realize and reflect on it, that was the major identity crisis, because I never knew which one is my history when I'm studying it, which one is my geography when I'm studying it. And the same goes on with my work now. Even now, when we're working, I think I sometimes envy people from foundations that work with countries that are a little stable. Like every other day, there is no decree. I sort of envy them every time they're like, oh, we made all of this happen and this was in our strategic plan. And then I'm like, oh, that was our strategic plan. And then we changed it like a million times before we ended up here because there were a million decrees passed as we were working. So it's always a struggle, but at the same time, we're all doing the best we can, honestly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Pashtana. And I think we'll want to come back to that theme of uncertainty that you mentioned, because I think that's a feature of education systems globally and not just in a context of high migration. So there may be some things that we can learn from the work that you and Lala are doing that could benefit, students across the world and across contexts. Lala, let me turn to you. You've really dedicated your life to making sure that children on the move, internally displaced children, have access to education in the Colombian context.
Yes, Caroline. So we have been working for 7 years in Colombia, in the border between Venezuela and Colombia, which is the city called Cucuta, where all the migratory flows from Venezuela started to. They began like in a massive way, like an exodus, really big, in 2017. So we started working in the school, like just Pashtana said. It's like there are many people doing many things, but we are not part of the system, and they are not part of a system. So the Colombian educational system, it's all the time trying to improve, to understand what are the needs of these children, but actually the emergency was kind of a thing that started moving out the socials, the people around NGOs in Colombia to start addressing this issue. So the first thing that in Comparte we start building were strong bonds between communities and organizations, because we understand that this was the way to transform not the lives of the children, but this was the way to be part of the system, how we can build those strong bonds between all the people that were doing something so we can start working with them. So we have a model that it started as a project. When you came down here, Caroline, we were just trying to understand what to do because the need was everything. Of course, they were malnourished. They were with health needs, housing, everything. But we understand that we can connect the people in charge and start working in schools. So these children were arriving to schools in order to be in a safe space, not to learn, but to be in a safe space, to find, to understand that they belong to a place. And of course, in schools is where they belong. So we in Comparte started enhancing these children capacities and capabilities so we can start generating agency while bringing the opportunities. And we do this through our model that is called Stay in School, which promotes the retention of the children in schools in the safe place. How we do this, we strengthen the safe spaces of this, I love to call the host schools, because they are the one who are hosting them. They are the one who are embracing them. And that's the way we're trying to close those inequality gaps, like access to water, safe water. These children and also the host communities and the schools, they don't have access to safe water. Malnourishment. This is something that really came into our alarm system in the organization in Comparte. Our whole team, we were really aware that 42% of the children that were coming from Venezuela were malnourished. So this is something that we needed to address, because it's a children that is malnourished. We all know they won't have the same opportunities of nourished children. So we started working with that. Of course, mental health going beyond the migration process that the family were going. So we started working with this amazing partners with mental health so they can start embracing their issues, and also some physical health. And this model, Stay in School, have three dimensions. The first is balancing. So as we were addressing malnourishment, it's like we address immediate needs that have a medium and long-term impact. So those needs that must be addressed and be balanced to the life of children and youth, so they can continue working in education, or they can continue in their inclusion. So we have balancing, we have educating. It's like a dimension where we see ourselves as an incubator of citizens. So they are going to be aware of their rights. They're going to be active members of their communities. We bring the information, so we work together so they can, this decision-making of the community will be informed. And also we do advocacy. And this is very important because we work very closely to the community. We are so close, and we bring this bond of trust with the communities and families. And so that's the way we can build with them the path to the inclusive opportunities that they have around in the country, such as I always say, regularization in Colombia. We are also part of the decision-taking teams, and we bring evidence and we bring data that is based, but is evidence-based. So those opportunities that are tailored are really approach to the capacities of the community.
I want to sort of pull on a thread that you referenced. We can, of course, think about schools as places where all children learn to read and write. They learn basic math, all kinds of academic and intellectual skills that will serve them in life. But you also alluded, Lala, to school serving another function, and Pashtana referenced it too. So helping to ensure well-being, being a safe space, a place where students, children can access all kinds of services that they and their families might need. And frankly, right here in New York, we're experiencing a wave of new arrivals, thousands of asylum seekers coming to New York City. And we're seeing that public schools are kind of the first step in those families finding solid ground here in the city. So Pashtana, turning to you, I'm curious, how that resonates with what you're seeing and what kind of work you find yourself doing with students, with parents, with schools themselves to make sure that kids can sort of make the most of this more holistic role of education in terms of providing some stability and safety in their lives.
One thing I have seen is we expect our teachers, or at least the education system in the US, expects the teacher to be a person who is a psychologist, who is a therapist, who is looking into the students' social life, personal life, well-being, and then also teach them and be their guidance counselor and all of that. And I sort of don't necessarily like that because I do think that a teacher who is very underpaid should be doing all of that. But then at the same time, learning from that, one thing I wanted for the longest time was making sure we create a space that is holistic, where we are giving them mental health and awareness and well-being on all of the things that are needed, given that we work in a country that is constitutionally, has no constitution, by the way, has the first decree that was given in accordance to young girls was, you cannot go to school anymore. Apart from that, there are decrees that are issued every week that says you cannot go to public, you cannot use Facebook, you cannot use cell phone, you cannot exist out of this space that you call home. So how do you combat that, but in a way where you don't have to fight it, with arms, of course. So with that, when we come to our schools, so the teachers, of course, teach biophysics, chemistry, mathematics. That's what they're teaching. But then we have this a group that goes on every Friday that they do a health and awareness circle where they talk about everything that they're feeling and they're going through, and they process it as a group. So there you don't have to be a teacher or a student, but a peer, because you're a woman and you're in a country. So you share multiple things: religion, identity, geography, language, but also most importantly, the political ban. It's on you because of your gender. So we do that, but then moving towards a more practical mean for me would be, how do we teach these young girls to become decision makers in their families? And how do we enable them? And that enabling comes through financial means. And of course, us being people with a theory that you cannot give people money to be in school, I'm highly against it. So the second best thing we could do is teach them how to earn money. And we do this with as young as 12 years old. We start teaching them web designing, coding, literally assisting people in work, interning for them, and getting online jobs. And I think that gives them that sort of space where if they're bringing in something to the table, they get to talk about that. They get to make those decisions. So given that we work with girls from age 12 to now 18 and 20, most of our focus is, okay, we're going to teach you something that you're going to need in 5 years or 10 years, biophysics, chemistry, mathematics. You graduate from here, you go to a good college, and you end up becoming a scientist or a doctor or whatsoever. But we're also going to teach you something that you need in the short run to continue becoming that person that you want to be in the long run. That is becoming someone's virtual assistant, coding, designing, volunteering somewhere, then getting a job. But last and not the least, we also want to focus on your physical and mental health, because you cannot even walk outside. So we're going to provide you all the space that you need to talk about menstrual hygiene management. We're going to provide you with all those products that you need. We're going to help you make them in case you drop out of school or you don't have access to it. And then we're going to make sure that we give you more idea on how to journal your emotions and thoughts, what to read, how to process it, who to talk to, and who to confide in. So we're sort of creating those spaces, but not necessarily teacher is at the center of it. It's more of like a space where we're all bonded by the situation. And then comes the parents. Because one thing I believe in is, if you're sending your daughter to school and you're dropping her in a situation where if you're seen doing that, you could actually go missing. I think for me, it's such a highly hopeful and respectful thing, but also such a dangerous thing, So our engagement with the parents is more on safety, on how to ensure that the girls, if they're showing up to school, how they continue showing up in schools. But then at the same time, catering to their needs. I was talking to teachers the other day in Kandahar, and she told me, she was like, a mother came in and she wouldn't leave until we would give her daughter an admission. And she started crying. And I was like, if I tell this to anyone outside Afghanistan right now, they won't believe me. Because in their head, Afghanistan, and especially Kandahar, is the Taliban stronghold. And nothing is happening. But these are actual people. And the Taliban are telling people that, oh, our people don't want education. But this is a mother in Kandahar showing up and doing that, right? So how do we cater to that? How do we expand on that? How do we provide more spaces to that? How do we bring in mothers with their daughters to give them that space, given that they're also vulnerable and they don't have that space?
Do you know leaders who, young or old, regardless of where they live or what they do, who are changing the world? Leaders who are not content with what is and are working hard for what could be? If so, please nominate them for the Telberg SNF Eliasson Global Leadership Prize at telbergprize.org. The nomination period will open on March 15th.
Lala, I thought I wanted to return to the case of Colombia because I think about 600,000 students from Venezuela are currently enrolled in the Colombian educational system. So about 6% of total enrollment. That's a pretty stunning number. There's other countries in the world that have similar numbers. But what do you think? And recognizing, of course, that it's not yet perfect. Lots of kids still lack access. But what do you think has worked or is working to enable that level of educational integration in Colombia? And are there things that you think the rest of the world could learn?
I hate numbers because they are inhuman. They are like each number, it's alive. So I think that we need to take what Colombia patience, I think, is so important, to be patient with the host community. We need to work with the host community, not only with the migrants. I'm a migrant in Colombia, of course, and I've been here for 15 years and I feel a migrant. I am part of the host community too, but I'm a migrant, and also my children. But we need to work hand by hand, not only talking to and addressing to the migrants, but also with the host community. I think it's very important. So Colombia has been working with all these efforts with the government, civil society, also the NGOs that are led by refugees or migrants are so important to be part of the system. Also, we are trying to change the narrative about how Colombians see Venezuelans in the move, because we need to change that pity look, no? Like, so I feel pity, I feel sorry for these people. That's why we need to integrate them. No. So these people are bringing capacities. These people are bringing work. These people are part of the workforce that Colombia has lost. These children will cover some demographic issues that Colombia with the war has lost. So this is the narrative that we need. And by creating leaders in the schools, by creating those safe spaces, and they can start working in their leadership. And also, as Pashtana said, with the parents, it's so important to work with them also, because these children will be the decision makers in their families with all the strengths that we are and all the capacity. So I think it's what have been working. I think the most important word, it's patience.
So Lars is sort of picking up on something that Pashtana spoke about early on related to the challenges of dual identity, right? Whether it's Afghan children in Pakistan or in the US, Venezuelan children in Colombia. How do your organizations and how do you as leaders and role models help children navigate that potential conflict of identities that they might experience as part of their education? Pashtana, do you want to start?
Being that child myself, a younger version of me, I always had so many confusing thoughts. Even when I returned back to Afghanistan, I was not fully seen as a full Afghan because I was not raised in my early years in Afghanistan. And I sort of always had an inferiority complex. I'm going to be honest about it. And I was like, why not? Like, what is wrong with that? But at the same time, I think we also have to understand that countries, as Lala said, that Colombia is giving them that space where they can actually go for that paper and for that passport or some that sort. But with Afghans in Pakistan, they don't have that. They get refugee cards, but you could be settled for 25 years or 30 years, and you might be seeing it now that you will be just turned away from everything and everything will be taken away from you and you will be sent to Afghanistan with nothing. Most refugees who are returning to Afghanistan are ending up with $200 or $300 from everything that they have earned. So it's a very different space. So in that space, I think when I ended up in the US, I was still going through that identity crisis. I met Amna Nawaz. She's one of my friends. And she told me, she was like, listen to me. You grew up in different cultures. You're ending up in a different culture at a very young age. And you're going to pick up on many things that are going to make you think that you're the other person. You're going to be othered from a lot of things. But then you can pick up the good things from all the cultures that you have been with or have grown up in. And then you can make your own part of space of your culture that you can relate to and feel safe with. And everything negative and toxic should be left out of it. Now, I know it's more of like a health and wellness thing, but I think it sort of helped me. And this is what we do with our children all over the world, but also especially when it comes to Iran and Pakistan, where they are ending up the most, and they're the most, I would say, hostile in many ways. The host communities are hostile. They don't see them as refugees, but as people who are coming up from a country that is engulfed with terrorism and is being led by terrorists. So how do you deal with that? The first thing that we do is we ensure that they have values, as Lala said, and I love the word patience. Values like patience and courage are instilled in them, which I personally think that they don't need courage to stand up to people and tell them, oh, I'm an Afghan and I'm proud of it. But also it's very important for them to know that it's okay to be an Afghan. It's okay that if somebody is feeling hostile towards you, it's not necessarily your problem to solve. It's totally fine. Let them have it. but it doesn't change anything with you. But then at the same time, the more they grow up, we try to have conversations with them. I think it's not something you can integrate into curriculum, like how to deal with identity crisis. But at the same time, it depends. Like in the US, if you get a special immigrant visa and you end up with a green card in a month and you end up getting integrated there. And the funny thing is, I meet all these Afghans, they're like Afghan American, or Afghan Canadian, Afghan British. But if you grew up in Pakistan and Iran, you don't become Afghan Pakistani or Afghan Iranian. You are an Afghan.
Is money a problem? I can imagine both of you would say it is. Spend a lot of your time fundraising, but you could tell us, how are these initiatives funded? Learn Afghanistan and Comparte. Do refugees or migrants provide their own resources? Or perhaps do you rely on foreign aid, international philanthropic support, et cetera? So Lala, tell us a little bit about how you find the financial resources to do this important work.
Well, of course, money is an issue. Of course, we as an NGO from the civil society, family and friends, this started, and but also bring in the data and the stories of the people that we're working helps a lot. So we try, as I said, of course, we need numbers. Of course, we need data and based on evidence, but we bring the humanity also to the story. So we try to work really together with the private sector. Also, of course, Tinker Foundation was one of our best partners in COVID, Caroline, and I have to take this into this conversation because you trust in our work, so we could continue the work through COVID, which was really, really hard around the world, and that was thanks to Tinker Foundation. So one of our principles is accountability. So we are so strict with our numbers and how we communicate with our partners. So we are open to international funds, individual funds, government funds, like all this USAID is here and all this American and European funds are in Colombia. And we're training our team so we can be accountable to all the projects that also international cooperation in Colombia or international funders are here.
And I would love to answer this question because we recently, last week, we found our sustainability plan. Yes. So 4 years ago, we had this sustainability strategy that we had put in place. But then again, of course, Afghanistan fell and everything was changed and challenged. But fun. Now Learn is sort of, I think, would say sustainable and is on the way to becoming 100% sustainable through our products. So what we do is we create content for young girls and young boys and everyone across the country, but we do it in native languages. And when we were doing it in 2020, before even COVID hit, it was, I think, 2019 when we started it. But in 2020, somebody reached out to me and they were like, oh, you're doing this work. And I think because of COVID, we should just license it and then give it to other organizations or bigger radio stations and all of that. And maybe they will help you get funding for it. And I was like, okay, but then everything fell apart. Now we have restarted the conversations. And after a year, we're finally able to crack the code on sustainability. We provide video content to a SIM card company, and then they publish it across the country. And then with each view, we get paid for that service. And that payment goes back into sustaining for teacher salaries or making more content and stuff. And the reason I'm bringing in this, because when I started Learn, I hate asking for money. So that was the first thing. I was like, how do I let go of that? How do I find a way where I don't have to ask for money? The next best thing was create something that people are going to pay you to consume,
Where do you find the curricula? Where do you find the books and teaching materials? How do you make sure that you maintain quality in terms of the work of teachers and overall, what students in your programs are getting access to? Who would like to answer that? Pashtana? Okay. go ahead.
So what we do with our curriculum is, yes, it's possible to maintain quality education. The most important thing you have to do is you have to make your own framework, even if there is no framework available. We go for references, we go for curriculum, we go for 2020 National Education Strategic Plan for Afghanistan. But then again, I personally go and study Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Iran, Pakistan, around countries and what they're teaching and how we could use that and leverage it in our own studies. But then again, geography and history, that remains the same almost. We continue ensuring that we update it as much, but continue teaching it what was taught in the past 20 years before the instability came in. So that's something that we have done, and we continue updating it with curriculum that is more cohesive from Canada, from US, even from India, and make sure that we bring in all the good things that we would need and leave out the things that might not be relevant to our context. So that's what we do with curriculum. Well, the second thing that we do is we employ teachers who were part of our network with within the time when we were working with as students in public schools. So we bring in those teachers, and that's what one thing that we do. But when we bring them in, given that we're a digital literacy based program, the first thing we do is we train them at least for 6 weeks, and we continue mentoring them throughout that program. And that sort of sets the precedent for how you have to be in class and what you have to deliver. So that gives them like sort of a lessons learned or outcomes and expectations for them. So that's what we do with the teachers. But then overall, I think the one thing you could do is then help yourself with that is make a system for yourself that can be a little resilient towards the challenges that you're going to see. So there are times when schools are closed for 3 weeks. When they come back, what is the first thing you do? You do reflections, but you don't just necessarily go back to what you were teaching. You restart what a 2 steps back approach, So those sort of things, we always do it, but it definitely is more doable to provide quality education. You just have to think more, I would say, strategically about it, but it definitely is possible.
The Telberg Foundation has a deep commitment to encouraging global, values-based leadership wherever we can find it. With the Telberg Leaders Mentoring Leaders program, we are looking to identify and nurture emerging leaders with outsized potential. TLML aims to leverage the Telberg Foundation's global network to accelerate emerging leaders' growth and impact. Are you someone, or do you know someone, who should be part of the TLML program? Applications will be accepted for March 15th. Go to telbergfoundation.org for more information.
So Lala, let me tweak the question a little bit for you for Comparte, because you're not necessarily providing academic instruction to students, but you really need to think about program quality constantly. And as you grow, how are you thinking about the kind of continued fidelity of the program and making sure that the interventions continue to engage and benefit and respond to the needs of children and families?
The shortest answer, Caroline and everybody and Pashtana, is we try to bring the evidence and to understand the evidence and the people's not needs, but the people's way of living, so we can address with some ideas so they can build up their solutions. And I don't want to be romantic about migration needs. I think this is so important. When I talk, as Pashtana said, about patients and about human. So I don't want to be a romantic people about the issues and the important views of addressing in a human way the migration, but also these are important things to bring to the conversation, because it's not will stay as an academic conversation or as a legal and government conversation. And I think my duty, my most important duty, is to bring the voice of the people so we can bring the opportunities.
So that is the opposite of imposing a kind of cut and paste solution. You're really starting from what are the sort of demands and opportunities that you're hearing articulated by communities themselves, and building your plan up from that. using all the evidence, that you've accumulated over the years. I want to get back to something really striking that Pashtana said at the beginning of this conversation, which is that at Learn Afghanistan, you've never had the benefit of strategic certainty, right? It's always been a sort of evolutionary process. You've always had to iterate on the fly in response to changing and really challenging conditions. And that brings me to something that I wanted to ask you about. I think one thing that we saw over the last 4 years of the pandemic, even those of us in very privileged situations, is that the education system is more fragile than we realized. Students of all backgrounds might suddenly find themselves in the position of needing to reintegrate into an academic environment or get caught up on their learning. I'm wondering, as you look out on a landscape in which we can only expect education to be disrupted more and more, whether for the reasons that you two have both lived and articulated, or climate crisis, or any number of other reasons. What learning or lessons do you think that we can benefit from in terms of the work that you've both done to make sure that when families and children face disruption, that education isn't the first casualty? Do you think that there are things that your work has to offer to a kind of broader global community of people thinking about education? Pashtana?
I think the one thing I have learned is education can be constant. It can be a constant even with the uncertainty, that now that I think about it is, I used to be young and I used to go to my Pashto lessons or my history lessons a lot. And I didn't know why. Why was that? Why would I, every time I had some sort of emotional sort of trajectory going on, I would go to those lessons and I would learn them again and again and again and again. And now I think about it, it's all about safety. How do you feel safe in that space, in that lesson? And I think the one thing I have learned is through our work in Afghanistan, when we started, it was 40 countries fighting in Afghanistan and Taliban taking hostages a whole district. And the people who were the victims were young girls. So I learned firsthand, we need to come up with a solution that caters to them. And then we transitioned into a place where we didn't even know who the president was. And then we transitioned into a place where the regime changed. And now we're in a place where the country thinks that it doesn't matter if you educate a girl or not, So you're going with all of that. But the one thing that stayed constant is we continued with these girls and we continued with them. And these were in grade 4 and 5. And now they're in grade 8 and 9. And they continue coming to these spaces. So one thing I have learned is invest in people big time. The most important thing I have learned is you can find all the resources you want. So don't think, I'm going to run out of funding. It's going to come through some way, one way or the other. But the most important part is you need to have allies who are going to implement it for you, who are going to be there for you, who are going to make sure that they hold your hand when you're going through this transition. So that's something that you have to provide. But of course, centering it around education and making it a constant in someone's life. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Lala, what can the education world learn from your work?
We need to create leaders. And this is a huge thing to say it. You can say it easily, but how we do it. So, of course, saving the difference between Afghanistan and our movement here in Latin America, and why they're migrating, they're different, but they're human beings, as Pashtana said. So I think they want to be seen, to be here. They want to talk. They want to belong. And I think that's the most important thing. So we need to build those bonds really strong. So they think they know that they belong there and they have something to bring and something to receive. It's not only education one way, it's both ways, no? So you are giving something to your group, to your teachers, to your community, and also you are receiving. So that's how we really establish that close relationship with the children and youth, so they can be working together and being part. So this can answer a little bit of the identity thing that a few questions ago. So the most important thing is making them understand that they have something to give, very important, that they have a voice and they want to be part. So when you create that leader, that starts like it's magical. It's amazing. So empowering that self-managing leadership with the children, it's amazing. I think it's one of the most important things. And also that connection, really close connection with the children, being there. I think it's so important.
Pashtana?
I think one thing that Lala said, education has to be practical too. Like it can be a philosophy, but it has to be practical too. The one thing that we do is we make sure that the people who are left behind, especially children, they're in touch in one way or the other. So they have a sort of a lifeline, a contact with you or someone like you who is educating them in that space. The one thing that we did was when Afghanistan fell was we came up with a radio program that goes across all Afghanistan and in all the 34 provinces in both native languages, but it also goes into the Pashto-speaking regions of Pakistan. So it goes into those places where the refugees would end up if they end up going from Afghanistan to Pakistan. And what that does is it gives you a lifeline to still be able to be educated, even if you don't end up in a school. But then at the same time, it gives you a space where you're hearing someone teach you in your native language, where you might not have that in your host community, Yeah.
Thanks, Pashtana. I love that example of radio. And one brief kind of anecdote from our own funding from Tinker Foundation during the pandemic. There was a lot of talk early on about, this is going to bring sort of usher in a whole new wave of really sophisticated ed tech. And what we found was actually kind of old tech, like community radio, was some of what was most useful for reaching the most excluded children. And, to the quality question, not necessarily replacing an in-classroom educational experience, of course not, but helping to keep kids connected to learning. I'm thinking of contexts like rural Guatemala, Amazonian regions of Peru, where we saw this technology or this sort of a strategy really be successful. And sort of more than anything, helping just to reinforce for students, even if they were disconnected from learning, that they still retain the identity of students and learners, right? That no matter what else, they were still learning and they would someday have the chance to go back into a formal school setting. And that in and of itself, it's not a replacement, but it's incredibly powerful. So I love to hear that you found those kinds of strategies effective as well. Thank you so much to both of you. I am so inspired by both your patience and your sense of urgency at the same time. And I've learned a lot from listening to you both.
Thank you for listening to this episode of New Thinking for a New World. I'm Alan Stoga, podcast host, and I look forward to your joining our next conversation. Remember, tell us what you think at telbergfoundation.org.